be able to hop in here and we'll get them on the panel. But we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you everyone for joining us for the Exit Advisors Town Hall series, where we have and continue to discuss the full gamut of M&A and exit strategy. And I invite you to check out our prior topics and town hall recordings that are downloadable on our website. They consist of a variety of high-level discussions to very nuanced and specific topics that all interrelate and tie into the ultimate, process of preparing to exit your business. Today's focus is going to be on the overall process of selling your business and each stage of it, from preparation and pre-due diligence to marketing, negotiating, and ultimately closing the transaction successfully. A little tidbit about ourselves. Exit Advisors is a lower middle market M&A advisory firm, and we serve as the seller's sole representation during this process. And our approach is very tailored to you and to your business. It's not just a one size fits all, meaning that we really work intimately with the CEOs and business owners and their management teams well in advance of going to market to help improve the overall business, help de-risk certain elements of it, and develop a strategy that will help maximize your valuation. Our team consists of Gary Cooper and Al Danto, the two managing partners, myself and Casey Bright. That represents a pretty deep bench of experience. And today's panel consists of Gary and Al, again, the two managing partners of Exit Advisors. John Walker, he's the principal attorney and CEO of Walker Law, one of our legal partners. Hoping to get him in here in just a moment. And then Jack Gunyon, a partner of Motivity Capital Partners, a private equity group that specializes in the acquisition, management, and growth of specialty retail chains. So as we go through today's presentation, if you have questions, please use that Q&A feature or the chat, preferably the Q&A feature. And we'll either address them as they come in or save them for the end during our Q&A session. So we're going to kick off with the first phase of the selling process, which involves preparation and prep work. And I want to start it off with Al. Al, speak to us about getting educated and understanding the process, and what are some of the first things a seller should know going into this?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Welcome everybody. Glad to have everybody here. The first thing is really. Maybe we need to put education number one, but it's really understanding the process, what it's all about. I teach at Rice in the MBA program, and students always laugh and they say, "What's the right answer?" And you say, "It depends," right? But as you look to what the exit strategy is going to be, it really depends on the particular business owners. I bought printing companies for about 15 years, and each owner of the company kind of had something else different, a little bit different in mind, as to what they want to do after they sold the company. Some wanted to stay on, and they said, I really want to do the part of the business that I enjoy. It could have been sales, customer relations. It could be working in the back, getting their hands dirty, on the quoting side, on the design side. So, each one's different. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to retire and play golf, move to Florida. But that's the thing for some. So it really starts with what's the target? What do you want to do? Do you want to get back involved in something else? Is this going to be the one last hurrah in your liquidity, retirement plan? Or are you going to maybe want to jump off and go into something else? After I sold my company, I stayed involved, and I teach at Rice and consult, and I enjoy it. Those are parts of business that I enjoy, and I plan to do it for a long time. So it's really setting that target, right? What you want to get to and what works for you.
Perfect. And then this will all interrelate. This is not a completely linear timeline here, but one of the first parts of kicking off is gathering information. We're going to emphasize today on financials, so Gary, from your perspective, and then I'm going to have maybe Al and Jack touch on this from a valuation and expectations perspective. But Gary, from an accounting background, what do you look for in the business's financials, or more importantly, what do you need to see before going to market to help prepare?
Well, this should be an ongoing process. Obviously, if you're planning an exit or planning a succession, you never know when you're going to get a knock on the door. So, your financial reporting should always be in good shape. Unfortunately, a lot of the transactions that we look at, the financial information is on the cash basis. It's not organized well. It's not caught up. It's not been reconciled. It just goes on and on. And so, financial information, when you're going to go into a transaction, typically you're going to want it on the accrual basis of accounting. That's the way that you're going to be able to report economic reality. It's basically using the matching principle, matching revenues and expenses in the same accounting periods. And so it needs to be clean, it needs to be organized, and it needs to tell a story. So, we used to laugh and say, your numbers talk to me. And that's exactly what it should do to a purchaser. They should be able to understand what does your working capital look like? What does sustainability look like? Do you have sustainable income, sustainable cash flows, and how well organized is that? And of course, that stems from the general ledger up to the financial statements themselves. I can tell you, most of the time, a purchaser is going to try to beat the price down based on flaws in the financial information. They're going to look at it. They're going to look for consistency, sustainability, and if they can note anything that they can come back on the seller and say, hey, something, these particular items look unusual. What else is under the hood? So getting that in order is really important in the preparation process.
And then now I want to go back to Al, and then Jack, if you'll kind of round this out once Al's finished. Al, obviously financials are a huge part of a huge part of the valuation, but it's not the only component. So how are you deriving, how are you plugging in financials, and what other aspects, plug into valuation? And then Jack, to you, when Al's done, how are you managing valuation expectations? You're coming from the perspective of the buyer. How are you managing expectations with the sellers?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Andrew. So, I just taught a 3-hour class in valuation yesterday, and cash flows are one part of it, but all these risks, are the other side of it. Valuations have incredibly wide range in the same industry, in the same city, even with similar sized companies, just based on the different criteria. And a lot of times, business owners and even as CPAs or even intermediaries and brokers who aren't familiar with the valuation process, they don't understand what really drives true valuation and market value and what creates these differences. So if you think about an average, I use a symbol of a bell curve, and you say, okay, the average in our industry is X, and each industry has a different valuation metrics, but all X is in the middle is the middle point of some to the left, under average, and some above average. So some businesses deserve a much higher than average valuation. They may not have customer concentration. They might be growing their business. They might have recurring revenue, ongoing agreements with suppliers, employment agreements, all that stuff. So this all factors into a valuation and the difference. I think it's really critical to have a really clear understanding of the realistic expectation when you sell. I'll give a real quick example, then I'll turn it over to Jack. But had a client one time that says, "Oh well, the valuation of my business is going to be $8 or $9 million." I said, "It's nowhere near that." And they said, "Well, yeah, it's 3 times revenue." I said, "No, it's 3 times cash flow, not revenue, cash flow." So they had $3 million in revenue and 500,000 or 600,000. So their valuation expectation, and they got wrong information, was about 6 times higher than the reality of what it would be. So it's really important to understand that before you kind of start the journey in the process.
Great.
Yep.
Thanks, Al. I'll divide the expectations into two parts. So one of them has to do with the valuation part. Um, More and more in transactions that we see now, even when you have audited statements as a seller, which is not nearly enough, is not even half the transactions that we look at. At best, they might be reviewed, but so many buyers like us are demanding quality of earnings audits against those statements. The QOV has become a very important part. And as a seller, you can get your own QOV, which really is a defense mechanism and enables you to be able to argue the validity of your financials and the strength of your valuation. So you might consider QOV as something you want to do prior to sell within the selling process. The second part of this is timing. I know everybody's trying to cram a bunch of deals in between now and the end of the year. That's not realistic. If you're just starting the selling process now, you're not going to get it done. I'm just telling you, it won't happen. The fastest I've been able to do these transactions, and I've done 17 buys, is within 90 days. That's the fastest I've ever been able to accomplish it. It's generally a 4 to 6 month process. And you got pressure in there. I mean, mama's already picked out a new dining room set, and the kids already picked out a new car, and you got all these people saying, oh, how come we can't get this done faster? Realistically, it is not going to get done faster. It's going to take you anywhere from 4 to 6 months on average to get it done. So it's my word on expectations.
You know, I'd like to at least enlighten people a little bit, Jack, on the quality of earnings. It's pretty interesting from an accounting perspective. There's no guidelines. There's really no standards for a quality of earnings report, a quality of earnings analysis. And, you know, to find somebody who can do this properly and really display sustainability of cash flow, quality of the assets, and even dovetail into the internal control of the company, it's a pretty creative document, but it probably is more impactful than an audit, I would think. I don't know your feelings about that, Jack, but it's a good report to use as a measuring tool.
Like I say, it gets very helpful to a seller oftentimes as a defense mechanism.
Yep.
When the buyer's trying to beat you down in price, you have a document that's been reviewed by what reputable firm that says this is why the valuation is the way it is, and we can justify it.
I want to move over to John now. You know, we've kind of covered the valuation, expectations, how the financials tie in, but there's obviously a lot more to this prep phase, and that's the selection of the team. Obviously, the M&A advisory firm is not the only person involved. So, John, can you discuss, you know, obviously as an attorney, the types of attorneys that you would need, and then some of the other members, and you know, how you go about selecting the right team for this transaction?
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. So what I typically see in the many transactions that I participated in is that the team is key. Most sellers, this is the biggest transaction they'll do. They spent a large part of their working career building value in their business, and they've never done this before. And you really kind of watch as you select your advisors, the people you have been working with, finding other members of the team, as you don't run into what I call the Wall Street phenomenon, as in the movie, as in Michael Douglas. For most people, they want to be a part of a big deal because they typically aren't. And that's all well and good, but what a seller really needs to look for is people who've done this before. And you're kind of seeing with these conversations today on our webinar, the kind of experience that comes into play. In the case of the attorney, you want an attorney who's done a bunch of deals. Ideally, he's done both buy side and sell side. But you don't want your brother-in-law who's the family attorney. You don't want your college roommate who's a criminal attorney. They're different skill sets. Those other skill sets are valuable, but they don't really come into play in buying or selling a business. Same thing with your CPA. You may only have a tax advisor who looks at your tax returns once a year when he gives them to you to sign. You want somebody who understands concepts like are being talked about here: quality of earnings, accrual versus cash. Those mean dollars in your pocket. And the CPA in particular needs to understand things like how to minimize taxes. And we'll talk about it in a little bit: an asset sale versus a stock sale, allocations of purchase price among assets. Those sorts of things put dollars in your pocket after tax. So you need people who are experienced. A financial advisor can be somebody who's very important to what you're trying to do. Not only what you do with the money after you successfully sell, but whether or not the purchase price that you've been introduced to, the value of your company, is that going to be adequate to meet your retirement needs? What you may need to do is to fix a bunch of things in your company, increase sales, add customers, reduce risks, so forth, in order to increase that value so you can meet those retirement goals. And in addition, your M&A or sell-side advisor is absolutely critical. They have the broader perspective from having done a lot of deals on shepherding this entire process. And all of these team members will have ideas on other members. If you're short the right tax guy or the right CPA, you're short the financial advisor, all these experienced team members will have ideas on how to flesh out and fill out the rest of the team.
And John, I'm going to have you kind of snowball. We're hopping around a little bit. Again, this is not sequential, but part of this phase is this pre-due diligence and data collection, setting up data rooms, getting organized records. What, from a legal perspective, are some of the most important things that you need to review that will allow you to create a purchase agreement that's clean and easy for the seller and that the buyer will accept?
Well, you start with the letter of intent or term sheet, because that's really the blueprint for the actual definitive documents. But beyond that, I'm going to want to see governing documents and ownership records. I've got one right now where at the end of the day, we're going to have one shareholder be the seller of the business. But there's been side agreements. I've got different shareholders. I need to see purchase agreements, because there's going to be representations and warranties, which we'll talk about in a bit, that you actually have authority to sell. If you're saying that you've got 100% control of the company and I can't document that, then that's going to be a problem. So we'll need to put those sorts of things in the document room, at least on the seller side. I'm going to want to look at the leases, both for equipment and for real estate, to make sure that they're assignable, because if they're not, that's a drill that the buyer is going to have to run to get those approvals. And the same thing with other significant contracts, significant customers that may have long-term contracts, or vendors that have key supply side contracts. All those are sorts of things that belong in the document room, in addition to the other financials and tax returns.
And then, to kind of round this out, I'm going to end with Al and John. We're on this theme of data collection and understanding what's in the business, going through pre-due diligence. What are some, maybe Al can talk about valuation enhancers, and John can talk about valuation killers, things that come to light. What are you really focused on that are going to affect valuation?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, the biggest part of an exit strategy and really getting prepared for business, it's just like a house. I live in Sugar Land. I lived in this house for 27 years. We're selling it. We're moving into the city. So when you sit down with the realtor who comes out, he's going to look through the house and say everything from the foundation to the roof to the paint to the doors to everything. What kind of shape is the house in? And when we first look at a company, you say, what kind of shape is the company in? Because when they go out there to the market, no one is going to pay millions of dollars to acquire a company and take all that risk until they really have their arms wrapped around it. So they're going to look at everything. They're going to drill down into contracts, agreements. So there's all these risks, and over time we've developed a list of the most common risks that are associated with a business. And these are the things that really make a difference of a business. And sometimes I say, hey, I'm like a doctor. You come into me and you're 60 years old and, your cholesterol's 230, your blood pressure's up, you haven't exercised in 4 years and, you're in really rough shape. And it's the same way with some businesses that come in. And it's hard to change a lot of this over time once it's embedded. One of the biggest risks in any small business leaving is selling is what happens when the owner leaves. Is everything tied up in the owner's head and all the relationships, all the value? And if that's the case, and it's not embedded in processes and systems and people, then it's an incredible valuation dehancer, right? It's going to really hurt value and impact value. And there's all these, dozens of different things that someone's going to go through. And like Gary said earlier, a lot of times it's just a reason to try to negotiate a better price, or even sometimes walk away from the deal. So, this plan to clean the business up and have it ready to go to market it's critical. It's critical.
Yep.
Very, very much so. Some of the other things that buyers will look at are, do you have your key employees, especially salespeople, on non-competes or non-solicits? And those are things you can put in place before you start talking to buyers. Same thing with your intellectual property. Al mentioned systems and procedures. You also may have some technology that you should at least put some provisional patents on. Are your trade secrets, the stuff that can't be patented or copyrighted, are those locked down and documented? In addition, you should be looking at whether you've got concentrations of customers. Very difficult to sell a one customer business. Same thing with vendors. Do you have an overly dependent vendor that you don't have locked down on a contract? Those sorts of things are key when someone looks at buying your business.
We know, John, also, just to kind of elaborate on that, if you're in technology and you're dealing in code and you're creating software, you better make sure that everybody working for you signs some type of document that indicates that the company actually owns the code and the software, because that can certainly come back to haunt you. I kind of compare it to recording a song, so everybody understands a little bit about music. And the people who come in and play instruments on your recording, you got to pay them. They got to provide an autograph to you that says that you own the record. Well, it's the kind of the same thing that holds true when you're developing software. So that's really important.
That's an excellent point, Gary. And those are called works made for hire contract. And if you've got ongoing intellectual property, copyrightable stuff, patentable stuff, and the software is a great example, you need to have those agreements in place so that you actually can represent that you own what you're selling.
Jack, any comments on valuation killers? Anything that's that you look for that sticks out as a huge red flag that's going to deter or reduce valuation?
Well, two areas we look for is the likelihood of the revenue stream, continuing. You mentioned concentration of customers. You mentioned the principal being the primary sales agent within the company. I served as a expert witness in a very messy divorce trial where the guy, his wife had way overvalued his business because 78% of the revenue was generated by him. And when they finally got down to the nitty gritty, they realized that had drastically decreased the value of that business. Human resource stuff, don't forget that, guys. It's very important stuff. One of the things you're acquiring in a business is the people. And are the people, are they going to continue with the business going forward, or are half of them going to leave? I mean, how many contracts exist, and are those contracts available, and when do they expire, and all kinds of things on the HR side that are really part of the equation.
We had a question come through while we're talking about valuation enhancements and integral parts to the business that make it noteworthy. And this was, discussing the cost of the team to the company. Owners usually do not have an idea of how much they need to spend for this service. They only look at the costs and not the benefit. So how do you convince the owners how important it is to have a good team in place, even if it is very expensive? So maybe Jack, you can discuss the importance of the management team when you're looking to acquire a company, if you intend to keep them on.
Sure. That's one of the important factors you're buying, which are going to assure the ongoing revenue stream that you're really paying a lot for. So the service levels of those people, their education levels, all kinds of things. We do background checks on all the key people. The data room integrity is, you got to pay for a data room. You realize it's not going to be free. I mean, we have 2 businesses up for sale now. I think the data room cost is running us about $1,500 to $2,000 a month for all the documents that we put in there. You say, well, I can do that myself. Well, then you're going to drive yourself crazy and get nothing else done in your business, but feed documents for a period of time. You're better off to set up a data room, a good one, and utilize it, because it will save you money in the long run, even though there is an expense there. The organization of your contracts and your data that you put in there is really key to saving everybody a whole lot of time and effort and money in the selling process. So make sure it's well organized. When they point to a big stack of documents over in the corner and say, have at it, gee, everything I know is in there, that's a real turnoff to a buyer, because we don't have the time to sort through your documents.
Yeah, and that kind of allows us to wrap up this section. But the theme here, the story, it's being organized, it's being transparent, being realistic, and I can't say it enough, and we do like to say it, but working on your business and building your business every day as if you want to sell it tomorrow, even if it's decades away or if you never intend to sell it. Build your business as if you were going to sell it tomorrow, so that your ducks are in a row and everything is just clear and organized. Because if people can make sense of it, if Jack can make sense of it from a buyer's perspective, it's going to reduce the risk, or the perceived risk, as Al likes to say, and give you a much higher confidence in a successful deal, let alone the valuation. So we'll segue now to, this was kind of giving an overview of the preparation, some of the things that we look to do and within prior to going to market. Next phase is this go-to-market strategy, identifying the types of buyers, all the way up to, working with them, and all the way up to, receiving the offer. And honestly, I'd probably flip this upside down, which is what I'm going to do. And I want, Al, maybe you can kick off, talk about the go-to-market strategy, what that involves, what it looks like, talking about the teaser, the NDAs, the SIM.
Sure. Andrew, I thought of something as we got into this. We've got a lot of materials on this. Like, we can send out a list of all the, the risks, the key risks, kind of evaluation, keys. And we also can send out an offering memorandum, maybe a blind teaser, stuff like that. So let's post that and get that out there. This all begins, with really looking under the hood, seeing the shape of the company. Again, what's the expectation for value? And if it's a long way off, if you say, hey, I need $5 million to retire and the business is worth 2, you're not going to get 5. If you need 5 and you're maybe at 4.4 or 4.3, you're close to say, hey, we're close. We might be able to get out there and go to market. So again, this whole expectation of, what the market value is. There's different type of buyers that are out there. The tip of the best acquirer is a strategic buyer, somebody that can come in and take advantage of the workforce that you have in there, maybe the customers that you have. So they may have complementary products that they can sell to the same buyers that you have, vice versa. They may want to add your product line to their products and services. Might be somebody looking to get into a region. I sold to a private equity group that was backing commercial printing companies back in the day, and they were looking to get in the Southwest. So we became their kind of Southwest platform company. So understanding, who the ideal buyer is out there, right? A financial buyer is just typically something that's going to come in there and they want to make a financial return. I'm going to buy the business for X, and I want to have X amount of return to my investors, to myself, whoever it may be. And then there's owner operators. So I'm not just going to come in and buy a small business, maybe get out of the corporate cubicle and say, I want to run a small business and replace my salary by running a business. So you have to understand, who your target buyers are. They're different in every case. And then the process is really to ideally get the company, cleaned up and in good shape, ready. Like Jack said, you want to set up that data room. Someone's going to come in there and want to have all that information. So you get that set up ahead of time. And the offering memorandum and materials are your marketing materials. In today's world, they can be a slide deck, a pretty comprehensive slide deck, PowerPoint deck that just tells the history of the company, reasons for sale, brief financials, the market, stuff like that. And those are what you use to market the company. There's targeted searches for buyers where you start reaching out specifically to targeted companies, maybe a competitor, someone that would maybe pay a premium for the company. And then you just kind of get it out there through different listing services, intermediaries, kind of like a real estate, network that you get a house out there on the market. So there's just a strategy that you develop around that, how you go to market.
Yeah, leveraging the relationships that ourselves or other groups would have with different types of buyers. Go ahead, Gary. What were you saying?
I was going to ask Al to elaborate a little bit on the informal auction, the importance, possibly having more than one person that's looking at the company versus a single buyer.
Yeah, good point. I left that out completely. I mean, you want to set this funnel up and then, move as many qualified and quality buyers through the process. So at the end of the day, you have a choice. Maybe you start out with indications of interest. These companies are, I see value in the 10 to $12 million range, and we move them through this funnel. And then ultimately, like Gary said, you get them to a point where we're taking best and final offers. And they know, a really good skilled intermediary will know how to kind of play the buyers off of each other. So they know that they're in a competitive situation. They may be coming up with the best terms in consideration, and you run them through this kind of an auction process, and you're getting best and final offers. At the same time, you're meeting with them as well and making sure, to some sellers, it's important who acquires the company, who takes it over, they got the right culture. That can be important. To other sellers, they say, I don't care. Whoever gives me the top dollar is going to get it. So, but you run them through this kind of auction process where you're getting competitive bids.
I have a comment about this funnel that Al mentioned. We're a small shop. There's myself and two partners, but we'll see over 200 deals a year that are presented to us. We'll actively look at about 20 of those where we've done the NDA, we get the CIM, we dig in, and we'll do one or two. So, and that funnel is pretty typical. I mean, it can be a bigger funnel, but it's not like you're going to get 50 people looking at your business. I just want to set that expectation. Also, I want to comment about the difference between financial and strategic buyers. You will probably get a higher price from a strategic buyer, but chances are your business will not look the same after that transaction. I mean, there are many strategic buyers out there looking for bolt-ons, looking to find something that they can include with their existing business And that sometimes means the elimination of your operation as it exists today. Because they're gonna combine accounting, they're gonna combine as much manufacturing as possible. They're gonna combine as much distribution as possible, because that's how they help pay for the acquisition. So strategic, even though it may pay you more money, you have to think about, what do you want the future of your business to look like?
Thank you, Jack. That's exactly where I was going next. The difference between financial and strategics. I think Al had mentioned this. Strategics can, same industry, could be a potential competitor, someone that wants to acquire you to grow geographically, or you have a missing piece of the puzzle for them. What is your kind of end game though as a financial buyer? Strategics obviously roll them up, grow them. It might have an exit way down the road, but that's really not the long-term vision. What's the longer-term vision for the financial buyer?
Well, as a private equity firm, I mean, we have a hurdle rate of about 33% internal rate of return per year on our investment. So some may be a little lower, some may be a little higher, but generally that's what you're looking at. And so we can't buy a business and just sit on it. We have to buy the business and grow it, and have a strategy going in to be able to expand that business enough to give us the kind of return I'm talking about.
Okay.
Strategic buyer, I mean, I've done a lot of bolt-ons in my life, and I got to tell you, my goal going in is to collapse as much as I possibly can in that business. And I believe in the Big Bang Theory, where I don't wait for a year to do it. I go in and boom, day one, I start collapsing as much of that overhead as I possibly can out of the existing business in a strategic acquisition.
Perfect. Well, this will help us kind of roll into the next section. We have offering memorandum here, and I want John to start this off, which will facilitate the info for the next section pretty well. But offers can come in two initial forms: the IOI, which is the initial or indication of interest, versus an LOI, which is a letter of intent. John, can you kind of briefly talk about the difference between the two, what you would expect to see in the IOI versus the LOI? And then, Mara, you can switch the slide, and we'll start kind of breaking into the negotiations and the transaction side of it.
Sure, thanks. Sorry. Sure. What you're looking for in a letter of intent is an outline of what is going to go into the purchase agreement. The indication of interest is going to be less formal, and what your advisor should be careful of is understanding at what point you've crossed into binding terms versus non-binding terms. You start with an initial indication of interest to see whether or not you've got a reason to continue talking, and you outline the basics of purchase price and how that might be paid and those sorts of things. When you get to a letter of intent, which is what you're going to sign before you go into the formal process of due diligence and drafting definitive documents, there you're going to want to have a very clear indication of what the price is going to be versus the valuation, whether you've got contingent compensation like holdbacks or earnouts, those sorts of things. And we'll talk a little bit more about those in a bit. That then becomes the blueprint for the asset or stock purchase agreement. That's really kind of the dividing line between that preliminary phase and then the formal phase when you're really headed to trying to close the deal.
Great. So Al, maybe could you talk a little bit about negotiations and different types of deal structures to help bridge valuation gaps? We have a few of them listed here. And And before you do start, we have a very relevant question that I'm gonna kind of throw into this now. Is it possible as a seller for you to increase the sales price at any point throughout the sale process prior to or going into due diligence? And how do you, is that possible? Can you increase the valuation? I would also counter that the valuation could also decrease. How common is it for these types of negotiations and valuation changes to happen after an LOI?
Yeah, maybe I'll take that. I was looking at that question, Andrew. I had a tough time with it. I wasn't really clear on it. I'm not sure who asked the question. Maybe they could, go into a little bit more detail on it. But under letter of intent, it's really critical. And John, lawyer in the room, he can comment on this as well. But it's really important when you go into the letter of intent to understand that offer is made on all your representations. So in theory, if all your representations are accurate and clear and you haven't hit anything and nothing comes up in due diligence, it should stay the same, right? But where you get in trouble at is maybe you didn't have your accounting right. Maybe you recognized expenses in 2019 and the revenue in 2020, so the revenue in 2020 was inflated. So like Jack said, if you can get a quality of earnings done ahead of time, you're going to catch these things. So sometimes they're unintentional, right? I mean, I didn't know it. Maybe as you go into due diligence, your sales manager quits or something like that. There's a thing called disclosures. You have to disclose all this stuff. You can't hide it or it's fraudulent. So if these things come out in due diligence, yeah, they can change the price, right? They certainly can change it because in essence, it's misrepresented, right? Of what the offer was made on. So that's where you see most of them. Maybe going into it on the upside, if you're under a letter of intent and maybe you secured a new contract with a client, right? $1 million contract. And you say, hey, now my cash flow projection for the next 90 days is going to change. You can certainly do that. Again, this is where your lawyer steps in. This is where a really good transaction lawyer steps in. John, I mean, I'm not sure, what rights, that you have to renegotiate that as a seller. Well, wait a minute, we got this new sale and I want to change. Well, we already have it under an agreement, right? So
you're right, Al. I mean, this is where the team really comes into play. Right, before you sign the letter of intent, the whole game is for your team to help you present your company in the best light so that you build the value as big as you can and get the letter of intent based on that. And while you're doing that, you also have an eye to, what can you back up, what will hold up in due diligence, because your advisors are focused on that as well. Then what the buyer knows that the game is after you sign the letter of intent is let's see what we can, what rocks we can uncover, what dirt we can uncover in the due diligence process, what things can we do in the document to put contingencies in there to let us claw back purchase price. And so what typically happens is the purchase price starts to come down after the letter of intent once you're engaged in due diligence and documents. That's why your team is important. And so can you counter some of that? If they find certain things, you can, but you got to keep your eye on the reps and warranties, which we're going to talk about in a minute, that you're going to sign. And you also need to keep your eye on whether or not you actually want to close this deal. If you have a whole bunch of questions come up in due diligence that you can't answer or you can't answer adequately, or if to counter that, you're bringing up all kinds of elements that you haven't talked about before that you're going to try and claim or increases in value, that creates a very messy process and makes a buyer very uncomfortable, and you can kill the deal. So that's why the team's important, the preparation is important, going through the letter of intent. So as a seller, once you sign that letter of intent, you're pretty confident that everything that you've disclosed is going to stick, and there's going to be very little arguments against purchase price on the backside when you're in due diligence and documents.
I think the word performance comes in. I mean, if you beat your budget in revenue and EBITDA by say 15% or 15%, you have a justification to adjust the selling price. you miss it by 10 or 15%, it's going to go the other way. So it's a double-edged sword. Got to be careful there.
That's
So Jack,
ongoing.
you make a good point that to kind of round this section out on structure, you know, that's a perfect opportunity for, you know, especially if there's valuation gaps between the seller and the buyer, having things like earnouts or a seller note. Maybe you can touch on those for a moment, and you know where they would be, how and where they would be used. You know,
Sure.
earnout versus a seller note versus a holdback.
We love for a seller to want to reinvest back in the company, you know, counting on the second bite of the apple to be worth more even than their first, because of the growth of the company. They have the confidence that they can grow the company, and we love that.
And then, I mean, what about from the perspective of a seller note? Do you, obviously that helps you with financing from the
does.
buyer's perspective, but it also is used
It
as some
does.
kind of risk mitigation tool.
You know, from the view of the seller, they feel like you're buying their business with their own money, you know, and so that's the negative of it from a buyer and seller perspective, because they think that you're really using them as your bank. If we can get seller notes, we do it, and if we can't, we build it into the financing pyramid, and we know that they're not going to carry any money back. It's just, you know, it's part of the negotiation. We'd love for them to do that. Yes.
You know, Andrew, just to kind of shed some light on this, I think one of the largest elements of a negotiation is the allocation of consideration. How much cash is the seller going to get up front? What are they going to have to take in the form of a seller note? What do the earnouts look like? That can certainly change how the company is valued for the end game. So, you know, if it's a little bit more risky, I mean, you may have to get earnouts, but you may have a little bit of upside with your earnouts as well. So it's kind of tricky, you know, dovetailing into the holdbacks as well. You know, is how much is going to have to be held back for you know, reps and warranties. I'm sure you guys could elaborate on that more.
Well, your team's going to help you do a good waterfall of how these funds flow, and how much risk you're going to be assuming by taking on holdbacks or taking on a seller note. You know, somebody comes in and ruins your business, the seller note's not worth anything to you, and that's not good.
Yeah,
Hey,
I think
Gary.
it really comes back here to, again, you know, it really depends, and it really depends on the expertise of your advisors and, you know, yourself to say, okay, you know, you get a retiring kind of baby boomer who's slowing up, and risk reward profiles change, and they're not up on technology. They don't want to reinvest money back in the business. They want to take it out, put it in retirement plans. They want to head to the ranch at noon on Friday and come back in at noon on Monday or miss Monday. And you say, hey, look, this business has really got potential with some young blood and changing technology and some capital behind it, private equity capital. Right. And you say, okay, you know, I'm going to sell this business, and maybe I roll 25% back into it. I got to put that money somewhere. In today's world, it's going to make 2%, you know, if that's so. We've seen some of the, Jack referred to the second bite at the apple, some of the biggest, you know, ultimate evaluations come out when you make that decision to roll it back in. And then there's times you say, you know, hell no, I'm taking the money and running, and I'm going to get all I can. And it's you know, that's where the expertise and the knowledge and the experience comes in, right? You got to know when to take it and know when to leave. So,
Well, I'm gonna this last question I'm gonna kick to Gary, and then have John round out the final part, which is closing and transition, which is coming next. But Gary, you kick it off. You know, the difference between an asset versus a stock sale. And then when you're finished, John, maybe kind of go into what the actual purchase agreement is going to look like, which we'll discuss in the next section.
Just real quick though, Andrew, I want to touch on this working capital just real quick, because this is one of the most difficult elements that there's a lack of understanding, right? As working capital adequacy. So, when you get into a transaction, what the buyer's going to expect is there be an adequate level of working capital to sustain the business, during the ramp up stage. And I know there's such a misunderstanding there. And then there's a look back, with the working capital. And if it's over, basically the seller gets a check. If it's under, the buyer gets a check. But that's something that it should be focused on early on in the negotiations. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that, where, everybody's transparent and understands this computation. Because it seems to me like every transaction we get into, this may be one of the most complicated elements of it. And it's really funny. It's when materiality just goes away and people start getting anal retentive over $25,000, even though it's a $50 million deal. So I just kind of wanted to bring that out.
The flashpoint.
But asset and stock sale, I mean, there's different tax ramifications for this. There's different purposes. And, we've gotten into this code section 1202 to where if you sell the assets of your company that you've held over 5 years and you have original issue stock, and there's some other requirements, I mean, you can walk away and not pay taxes on the first $10 million of the gain, or 10 times basis. And so you've really got to look at that as to how you set up your company to sell it. And when you sell the assets of a company, it's all about outside basis. It's what you have invested in the company is going to determine what the gain is going to be. And so, in both cases, you have a lot of intangibles. They all receive capital gains treatment. But an asset sale is pretty typical because most buyers don't want to assume the liabilities of a company. And when you purchase a stock, you're doing that. You're saying, I'm taking all the liabilities of the company, contingent liabilities can fall in your lap. So there's more responsibility associated with purchasing the stock of a company. So you mostly see asset purchases. And, another thing that needs to be done early on is the asset allocation to, determine how is the sales price going to be allocated to the assets. And obviously a seller wants as much goodwill as possible, because goodwill is 15-year property and goodwill is subject to capital gains treatment. Any asset allocation to a tangible asset could create ordinary income as far as when the transaction's completed. But it's certainly something that must be noted at the beginning of the transaction, what the intent is.
Gary, they should develop a list of excluded assets at the very beginning of the transaction. I mean, I've found everything from, boats and airplanes, and my airplane doesn't go with the deal. Well, now wait a minute, that's an asset of the company, and if you're going to exclude it, then that has something to do with the price we're going to pay. So think about excluded assets up front.
But, Jack, if you bring that up, it's really interesting. Excess cash, something that needs to be brought out. So sometimes in some transactions, the seller will keep actually the receivables and all the cash. CPA practices they do. And so, that goes up to that working capital computation. But you're right, excluded assets must be noted, up front.
We tend to gravitate towards sort of a modified asset purchase because payables and receivables, I guarantee you, if there's a cutoff date and the seller is responsible for all the payables as of a given date, and they take all the receivables of it, somebody's not going to get paid in that process. I just guarantee you. I'd rather that the business continue to be responsible for the payables and the receivables on a normalized basis. And then nobody gets messed up in that process. And by doing a working capital peg, you can come up with a number like that.
Yep.
Well, we're coming up, and I want to save a few minutes for questions. So the last section, we can go to the next slide. We've actually done a pretty good job of talking about a lot of what's going into, the closing to the final purchase agreement, whether it's asset or stock. Jack, you pointed out excluded assets, things that are put, ironclad into these purchase agreements. John, maybe you can, so that we can get to Q&A. Maybe just kind of close this out with the kind of the meat of the purchase agreements and going through closing. My focus goes to the reps and warranties and disclosure section. Maybe you can talk about that.
Sure. The purchase agreement, when you get to that point, is really to capture all of these considerations that everybody's just mentioned. The working capital, the excluded assets, the consideration needs to be very, very tightly worded so that if there's an earnout, what the criteria is. If you're rolling stock in, how is that going to work? How is it going to be valued against the purchase price? All these sorts of details are key. So you recite the consideration with particularity, and what the buyer's trying to do is to reduce his risk. So that's why the devil is in the details for them as well. So with respect to representations and warranties, they're trying to protect themselves from knowns and unknowns and known unknowns. So they're trying to protect themselves on terms of authority, in terms of whether or not the information that you've given them, in which case they're trying to justify the valuation that they're going to be paying on. All of that is true and accurate, as well as any sort of risks. Are there litigation risks out there that could derail things either directly or indirectly? Do you actually own all of the intellectual property? All those sorts of things goes into representations and warranties, and your attorney is going to sit down with you and review them with you and make sure that you can actually say that all those things are true. There's also going to be more likely than not one or more restrictive covenants, particularly on the seller. The buyer wants to know that they've got a clear playing field after they buy your business, and you're not going to come back in and take customers and so on and so forth. Those need to be tightly worded, and they need to be consistent with what your goals are for after you sell your business. You may just want to go retire. On the other hand, you may want to do other things, and they may be, in one sense or another, be complementary to your existing business. How that non-compete is worded to let you do things that you want to do is going to be key. And then in the transition, that's going to speak to how you're going to transition employees, how you're going to help with customer transitions, and all those sorts of things. If you're going to continue on as either a consultant during the transition period or as an employee, you want those details nailed down and to be very clear, and you want to be fairly compensated. Some cases, it may not take a lot of work and you wouldn't be compensated, and you just consider that part of your goodwill into the deal to get it closed. In other cases, you're going to continue on as a real employee with a real salary and real benefits, and you want that clearly delineated, and that would be part of the closing documents. So it's all those sorts of things, and as I've said, the devil truly is in the detail, and that's why you need experienced people advising you at that stage as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you, John. And I know we're at the hour. We have a few questions that I'll get to if people are able to hang on. But we just did a very front to back summary within about an hour, and obviously there's a lot more to this process. There's a lot of nuances. Like I mentioned at the beginning, Al also touched on this. We have a lot of resources that talk about kind of each of these specific areas in a lot more almost excruciating detail. This just kind of gives you the framework and the roadmap.
It sounds like we need a part two. So.
Yeah, maybe part two, or start diving back into some of these more granular items. But this should give you a good solid overview of kind of what to expect and what the process looks like. So thank you, everyone. Real quick, just some questions we did have was, first, please discuss the due diligence process, both from like a normal and a fast tracked. So I think we did a good job of talking about, what normal due diligence looks like. Maybe someone would kick off with, is there a fast track due diligence? Does that even exist? If so, or is it just a cover for a normal due diligence with a bunch of risk mitigators that are built in?
I don't know what that means as far as fast
I
track.
mean,
I've never done one of those. Uh,
we got a lot of,
No
What-
shortcuts to the process as far as I'm concerned, but.
When I've seen it go really quick, it's because the financials are extremely well documented, extremely tight. And in this particular business, there were a number of customer contracts. Those were all easily available and able to be put into a data room. So I agree with what folks have just said. There really isn't a fast track process. There is a way to make the process go faster rather than slower. You make it go faster by being organized and working with your advisors to make sure all the ducks are in a row. You make it go slower by not doing any of that, being completely disorganized, not being able to find stuff, et cetera.
Right.
yeah, and Andrew, I would reference, I think Gary did a town hall on due diligence, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Al, here's something to consider. Jack talked about the quality of earnings. And I know that, Al, we did that for one of our clients we worked together on, and we did an upfront quality of earnings. We built the data room. We almost had all the questions answered before we had the deal with PwC Germany. And we did fast track that due diligence. If you want to look at it that way, we got the deal done much quicker because of preparation.
Well, and to go back to the team aspect, if you've got the right team, they're anticipating the kinds of things that a buyer, a typical buyer, will want to see, want to know, want to look at. And that's what you're doing in the process of building towards that moment when it's time to do the formal due diligence.
You're exactly right, John. From my perspective, when I'm reaching out to strategics or private equity groups for a client, and I've been asked the same question. Obviously, there's some very specific questions to a business, but a lot of what we get is the same, and we anticipate those beforehand. Not only does it make it faster, maybe it's not a fast track, but it does facilitate the speed, like you'd said. But it also it gives the buyer a lot more comfort when you have everything here it is, perfectly detailed out in every different way you want to see it. Here are the answers before you even have to ask them. I think it puts a lot of conviction into doing and completing the deal, even adds value.
We don't even have a dog in this hunt, but I would say one of the best things you can do is have audited financials, or at least review. And then you check that box, because so much of this can get tied up in just the analysis of the financials. And if you provide audited financials and okay, I'm taking them at face value.
Yeah. Well, one last question, and then I'll let everyone go. I know we're running over. What are some of the ways to vet buyers to ensure that they're the best beyond just the best price? And at kind of what point do you decide to work with one exclusively? I can actually take some of this. I think buyer fit is going to tie a lot into what your vision is for for your company, and also for you, how plugged in you want to be. Like Al said, do you want to go and play golf and retire? Or like Jack said, if you get acquired by a strategic, are you going to change the entire appearance and the legacy of your company completely? And does that matter to you? So I think you have to be comfortable with, either holding on or letting go of your business, and its kind of vision in the market. And then also from your perspective as an owner, are you willing to stay on and continue consulting, working on it full-time, part-time, no time at all? You have to factor those things into your lifestyle when exiting. It's not just about price. And obviously you're going to look at the experience of whoever the buyer is. Are they going to take this? You might get paid, but are they going to take it and crash it in 2 years or less? Or is it going to grow and flourish? And a lot of that, if you have earnouts and notes, you want them to be a viable purchaser, so that if you do have contingencies, things trailing on the end of the transaction, you're going to get made whole.
Yeah, Andrew, that's something else to add, but in this world of COVID, I think we've gone a whole step further in terms of electronics and not meeting people and doing stuff over Zoom. And, we had an offer from a private equity group on a client that we're representing, and everything sounded great, looked good, was accepted, and we never met the potential buyer. So yesterday, and it's a 60-year-old seller, and he says, I'm old school. I'm not signing a letter of intent. I'm not going to agree to anything until I meet them. And they flew into town. The CEO flew into town yesterday. We spent the entire afternoon together. We kind of broke bread. We had lunches brought in, and they talked and heard their, where they came from, what their vision was it in line? I drilled down on where they're going to come up with a capital at, what deals they had done, what the structure of the terms would be. And we needed to do that. So just kind of good old, it's almost like dating. You've got to go spend some time together and realize it. And again, that upfront piece is that, do you care all about the money and you really don't care? Or is it, I really want someone to carry my legacy on, I'm going to be a part of this, and I want someone that's going to take care of my employees. And like Jack said, not just come in and maybe break the company apart, right? So you got to understand that ahead of time.
Well, guys, we're over, so I'm gonna call it. But thank you for your time. Thank you for all your insights. For everyone who participated, if you still have questions or we didn't answer anything fully, please reach out to us. Definitely check out our I think it's our resource library on exitadvisors.com. We go into everything we've just discussed and under the microscope essentially. So there's a lot of information out there. But for everyone here, the panel, thank you for your time, and hopefully we'll have you again.
Andrew, let's post the stuff we talked about today. Some of the key risks, the risk checklist, offering memorandum, blind teaser, maybe even a sample, NDA, stuff like that.
Okay, great. Yeah, I can get with Mari and we'll do that.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Bye.